Okay, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي صدق الله العلي العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the third session in our series of 10 lessons on covering the short surahs of the Quran. The last session we stopped at the introduction of Sura Al Feel and Sura Quraish. I'll just do a quick recap of what we did last week and then continue with the actual two surahs. I showed you this slide before about what the Near East looked like around 400 Christian era, which is about 200 years before the birth of Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and also the same period basically before the year of the elephant, which is the surah we're going to be covering today. So at the time, we know there was the Roman Empire. We had an empire in Habasha. This was called Al Jazeera, and the Sassanid Persian Empire on the right. So the Sassanid and the Roman were the two big empires of the day. The Arabian tribes were scattered all over the peninsula, and being desert, no one really felt the need or the urge to occupy this particular territory. So literally, the Arabian tribes just did their own thing without being occupied by any of the two bigger empires of the day. We covered these two verses in Surah Ibrahim, one in Surah Baqarah and one in Surah Ibrahim. The parts highlighted are important, which is Ibrahim alayhi salam made a dua, especially after he had built the Kaaba with Ismail, his son. He said, "Oh Allah, make this a secure town. In other words, give it security and tranquility and peace at all times, and provide its people with fruits," which is the peace part of it. So it's peace and security that he made a dua for. Then he went on further in another verse. He says, "Oh Allah, I've come to a barren valley. In other words, there's nothing growing here, no vegetation whatsoever, just bare rocks and sand. And I've come to build a sacred house of yours. And the purpose of this house is that, oh Allah, make this, that people that come here maintain the prayer. In other words, yuqimu salah, establish salah. And also that their hearts incline towards the fact that you are the greatest and you are the Rabbul Alameen. And also provide them with fruits." Now, if you look at these two verses, they are very good prelude to what we're going to study coming forward. And if you've been to Makkah and Medina, you notice that these are the two characteristics of these two cities of Medina and Makkah. It's got absolute peace and tranquility and calmness about these cities. And also in terms of fruit and food, alhamdulillah, it's blessed with the best of food and the best of fruits, even out of season in other parts of the world. But somehow in Makkah and Medina, you get the best from all over the globe. So this is a dua that was made 2.5 centuries, 2,500 years rather, before the birth of the Prophet. And look at how it came in its culmination at the time of the Prophet, and even now, 1,400 years later to us. So it's almost like a 4,000-year-old dua. It's still being, rolling out till today in Arabia. Right. We then also mentioned about the distances between the two, and I think I gave you this map more to show you the distance between Makkah and Sham in the north, and Makkah and Yemen in the south. And these were the distances, about 1,800 kilometers and 1,500 kilometers. And these are the two trips that are mentioned in Surah Quraish, Rihlat al-Shita'i wa Sayf. In other words, the trips that the travelers used to make in the winter and summer months. We then moved on to looking at the topography of the land. We said Adan in Yemen is at sea level right down in the south. Najran, somewhere between the border of Yemen and Saudi Arabia today, is about 1,300 meters above sea level, and Taif is about 1,900. And Makkah is down again at about 277. And the distance between the two, if you look at the horizontal plane, is about 1,500 kilometers. In comparison, just to bring this sort of distances into perspective for us here in South Africa, Durban is at sea level. Panarinan is about 1,700 above sea level meters. And the distance from Joburg to Cape Town is 1,500 kilometers. Now, why I'm giving you this is just to give you a sense of to what extent Abraha and his armies and those elephants went through in order to make this journey from Aden in Yemen to Mecca, somewhere in the middle of Arabian Peninsula. It was almost like traveling uphill from Durban to Van Rieenen, and you know how the heavy laden trucks battle to climb up the Van Rienen's pass. You can imagine what it was like for elephants to climb up as well, that kind of altitude. And then in terms of the distance, I mean, it's just a 2-hour flight, but it takes 1,500 kilometers by road or by a beast like an elephant. And 1,500 kilometers is a long, long, long way. Now, we also mentioned that the elephant, which was like the tank of the day, was not known to the peninsula. It was the first time that an elephant was used in warfare in the Arabian Peninsula. And it was probably the last, because elephants are not meant for desert and mountainous terrain kind of walking. Also, the birds that are mentioned, flocks and many types of birds that came from different parts and all gathered on this place just in order to defeat the army of Abraha and the elephants. And we mentioned also that the year of the elephant, 570, is like a marker in the calendar, because everybody that lived in that period always referred to the year of the elephant as that year. It was like almost like ground zero, where prior to the year of the elephant, they would say it was happened 10 years before the year of the elephant, or if an incident happened 15 years after, then they mentioned 15 years after the year of the elephant. So it became like a marker in their calendar. Very much like for us, we've got 2020 as the year of COVID. So now when we talk of BC and AC, we mean before COVID, 2020, and after COVID, which is the year we're in now. So it's also very similar in terms of the scale and the magnitude of the events. We then moved on to some of the historical context. We said that the lineage of Ismail alayhi salam settled all over Jazeera, and around 300 Christian era, the Christian Yemen was ruled by Habasha, the emperor in Ethiopia at the time. Then in 450 CE, which is now coming closer to the birth of the Prophet, there was a great flood in Yemen, which decimated the economy of Yemen, and the Yemenis moved north. So Aus and Khazraj, the two famous tribes from Yemen, moved to Medina. And there was a gentleman called Qusay ibn Kalab who tried to make Mecca a unified state. So he tried to unify all the different tribes that were located all over the peninsula. And Qusay was called Mujamma. Mujamma means the uniter or the gatherer of the different tribes and communities. He had 3 sons. Abdul Manaf was one of them. As you can see in this little table here, Qusay had 3 sons. Abdul Manaf was one of them. And he sees this opportunity to say, you know what, because Yemen is now decimated after the flood, why don't we make Mecca the center for trade and commerce and industry? And he got together his immediate family, his 4 sons, Hashim was one of them. And they then, the 4 brothers got together and made what is called an economic agreement, which in Arabic is called Ilaf, which is that word we find in Ilafi Quraish, the first words that you see there. So for the brief period, the Jews controlled Yemen. They oppressed the Christians. Abraha was a general linked to Habasha. He led the coup and took over control in Yemen. He built a famous shrine or temple or cathedral. It was a beautiful tourist attraction, but not with the intention of building a house of worship. It was not a religious thing. It was more just a beautiful building that would attract, hopefully, tourists and visitors. So he wanted to do 2 things. One, to bring back the trade and make Yemen an economic hub like it was some 150 years before. And when the Arabs heard of this sort of thing that he was building, they came, and one report says they burnt it down. And the other one, they just came and they defecated in it to show their displeasure in the fact that someone was trying to build something in a comparison to what the Kaaba was in Mecca. So Abraha, obviously, with an ego, he got enraged. He mustered his troops. They say in history about 12 to 60,000 soldiers were gathered. There were about 9 to 13 elephants in the army, and the big one was called Mahomed, and they headed towards Taif. And this was the same year when the Prophet ﷺ was born. So this is where we stopped last week. Let's continue from there. Now, I just want to show you what was the logistics plan behind this invasion of Mecca. First of all, the distance is a long distance, 1,500 kilometers. If you look at just one elephant, it requires 150 kilograms of food per day, or 60 kilograms in dry matter. So in other words, if you don't give them fresh leaves or fresh twigs, you have to find other dried kind of food to the quantity of 60 kilos. So that's the food side for one elephant. Then on the water side, you needed something like between 140 and 200 liters of water daily per elephant. So it's like almost one bathtub full. Now imagine carrying this kind of things, and he had 9 to 13 elephants, and an elephant can walk an average of 25 kilometers per day. And at a very extreme maximum, it can actually do 195 kilometers, which is quite a distance. But if you look at the terrain, if it's rocky and up and down, you can't actually cover that max in any way. And even if you're going on a sort of level plain and it's sandy, the hooves of a camel is meant to walk in that sand. But an elephant will battle, although he's got thick legs and almost stumps that sort of go into the sand. But if it's loose sand, it would battle. So 25 kilometers, more or less, the average kilometers that the elephant can walk per day. And the soldiers, we said, were about 12,000 to 60,000. Makkah had a very sparse population, so there was very barren and desolate. So any tribe they came across along the route simply got subdued, and they in fact came forward and just pledged their allegiance to Abraha. They didn't want to put up a fight because they knew with this size army, you'll just be run over. So Makkah was literally for the taking. Abraha's motive as well, we said it's not religious, it was actually economic. The Quraysh also, although they hosted idols in and around the Kaaba, these were idols there simply to keep all the neighboring tribes under check and to control the trade. That was the main thing. So if you look at Makkah, which Ibrahim alayhi salam built for the sole worship of Allah, it was sort of, the whole purpose of that Kaaba was over the 2,500 years had denigrated to the point where the Quraysh had populated it with tribes, with idols of all sizes and shapes and made of different products, different rocks and twigs and branches, etc. Now, on his way, Abraha encountered the tribe of Thaqif in Taif, and they had their own idol called Allat. Now, in the Quran, you heard of Allat and Al-Uzza. So Allat is one of those major idols of the Thaqif tribe, and they used to keep their idol in Taif and not in Makkah. So they had a bit of a difference of opinion with the Hashim family in Makkah, whereas they were in Taif. So they didn't, by choice, choose to put their and to be subservient to the Hashim tribe in Makkah. So they kept their tribe in Taif. And when Abraha came, they actually pledged to be, sort of subservience to him and said, we'll actually assist you in this launch pad from Taif to Makkah to take over. And they offered the services of one man, Abu Rijal, who was a well-known, like a route finder and like a trekker almost. He knew the mountainous regions around there, and he knew the best route to guide the elephants and the groups of soldiers on the way to Makkah. Now, when the Arab tribes heard about Abu Rijal, they actually regarded him as a spy and a sellout. And actually, when he died even before the troops could reach Muzdalifah, and where he was buried, Arabs came after that to actually spit on his grave just to show their disrespect to this man who was like a spy and showed Abraha the way to Makkah. Now, Sura Al Feel is based in the month of Muharram with the arrival of Abraha's troops in Muzdalifah. The amazing thing is when the elephants and the army arrived there, when they were facing the Kaaba, the elephants actually refused to move in that direction. They just sat down. But when they were forced to stand up, when they would turn, they were able to move in another direction. But when they came to facing the Kaaba, they just refused to move. So this was quite like a setback for Abraha to say, why now? We come all this way. We travel almost like 1,480 kilometers of this 1,500 kilometer trip. And now the elephants are refusing to move forward right when we're on the doorsteps of the Kaaba. Now this happened in a wadi or the valley of Muhassir. Now in Hajj, we are asked to move quickly past this particular valley between Mina and Muzdalifah, and I'll show you a map just now. So, and Muzdalifah happens to be also the place where we pick up pebbles to throw at the Jamarat. This is a symbolic of, pelting of the shaitan that we do during the days of Hajj. Now, Abdul Muttalib, he advised the Arab tribes to retreat to the mountains, saying, this house has a Lord. In other words, the Kaaba has a Lord, which is Allah, and he will protect his own house. So we don't have to do anything. So they were like almost chicken, in the sense that they didn't want to face the onslaught of Abraha's armies. And at the same time, they took refuge in the mountains, waiting to see what will happen. And lo and behold, they saw a spectacle that they could never, ever believe. What they saw was that Abraha's army was defeated by birds that came in flocks, like literally in their hundreds, each one carrying 2 stones in their 2 claws, as well as one in the beak. So they literally had like 3 missiles of this baked clay or shale that rained on the armies of Abraham. And Abraham also was, injured quite a bit, but he actually survived the ordeal, although most of his army had perished, to such an extent that he developed a serious skin disease after this hail of clay shale that came on him. And there was no cure for it. He survived, but he made it back to Yemen in one piece. And it was there. So it was only in Yemen that he died. So, and the beauty of the surah is that there's only one mention of this event in the entire Quran, and not even by his name was mentioned. In other words, when you talk of the Ad and the Thamud people in previous generations, there are repeat verses about the Ad and the Thamud and Saleh and Hud and Lut and all the other prophets, and how they were, treated by the people and rejected by the people, and how they finally met their fate. And even their fate is sometimes described in 3 or 4 or 10 different occasions in the Quran. But this particular event is only mentioned in this one surah, very short, just 4 or 5 verses. And this was the miracle that Abdul Muttalib and the rest of the Arabs actually witnessed as eyewitnesses. And this was heralding the event of one of the greatest events that came 50 days later, which was the birth of our Nabi Mahomed sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this was the Sura Al Feel in a nutshell. Then we go on to Sura Quraish. Now Quraish, like we said, they formed covenants or agreements with other tribes in the Arabian Peninsula, and they used to undertake trips to the north and to the south. And they were told in the surah, in no uncertain terms, what you must do is you must worship the Lord of this house. Now, the amazing thing about these 2 surahs is, although there was an onslaught on the Kaaba in the previous surah, Sura Al Feel, but there's no mention of the Kaaba in that particular surah. The only Kaaba mention is in this one, where it's saying worship, and it's a command to the Quraysh to say, worship the Lord of this house, right? And also why? Because you have been blessed with food, and he gave you security and peace. You remember the Ibrahim's dua 2,500 years before. And this is the culmination of that dua which came through. So this is in a nutshell, these 2 surahs. Let's go on to the particular surah itself. Now here's a picture of Wadi Muhassar. It's a point between Mina and Muzdalifah. It's well cordoned off and it's marked off. I think these signposts tell you that you're entering Wadi Muhassar and now you're exiting. So there's that about 100 or 200 meter stretch where in the days of Hajj, you are not allowed to collect pebbles from this place when you're coming from Muzdalifah into Mina. And on the Mina side, you're not allowed to put your camps in this particular wadi. And this is because there was an azab of Allah meted out to Abraha and his army in this particular place. Now, if you look at it pictorially in terms of the distances, just to give you a sense of it, there's Makkah on the extreme left, the tunnels, then you get the 3 Jamarat here, you get this place called Mina, which is the tent city. Here you get Muzdalifah, where we spend one night picking up the pebbles. And then further down, we have Jabal Rahma or Arafat, where we go. So if you look at in terms of distance for the Kaaba, Arafat is about 17 kilometers away. Muzdalifah is about 11 kilometers away. And Mina is about 5 kilometers to Makkah. Now, if you look at this dotted line, it shows you the actual border. Muzdalifah's border ends here, and Mina starts there. And you can see this little gap in between. That is called Wadi Muhassar, which is the area where you are told to walk across in a brisk pace without stopping, without performing any salah, nothing you must do in that particular area. Pick up your pebbles in Muzdalifah that night, And in the morning after Fajr, you go immediately into Mina and do whatever you have to do. So this is Wadi Muhassab. Okay, so if you look at the actual surah itself, it's got only 5 verses, only 24 words. It was revealed at Makkah. It talks about the destruction of the armed force that came to be known as the elephant people, or the company of the people, the company of the elephants, or the Ashab Al Feel, right? And the Al Feel is mentioned in the second verse here. You can say Bi Ashab Al Feel. And it's a reference to the destruction of this particular army that came to want to destroy. Right, so if you look at it verse by verse, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alam tara kayfa fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil. Now this verb tara, you're going to see this particular verb or come across it very, very often. So ra'a is to see, he saw, and tara is you, singular, did you not see. And lam makes this verb negative past tense, and is like a particle to ask a question. So the question is have, is lam means not, and tara means you, and seen, the ra, because it's a weak letter, a weak verb with ra, alif and a ya, weak letters in the other two of the three. Just the ra is part of the 3-letter verb ra'a. And alif and ya being weak letters, they fall away when they have the lam in front of it. This is just a grammatical thing about it. So that ra alone is from ra'a or yara, which means to see. And kaifa means how, right? Another question. So it's like almost 2 questions. Have you, the is one question, and kaifa is how. So it's, have you not seen how your Lord or your Master, your Sustainer, your Rabb, dealt with? Fa'ala is to deal with, right? Or to do something to. Be is to, and ashab is the companions. You had sahaba, ashab is companions or friends of the elephant. Now, feel is both singular and plural. Feel, afyal is the plural, but feel is also the collective. In other words, when there's more than 2 or 3, you can even use feel to represent the collective of more than 3 elephants, and we know it's between what I said up to about 9 to 11 elephants that were in this particular expedition. So that's the first verse. Alam yaj'al kaydahum fi tadlil. Again, that we saw in the top verse is here again. Means did. Here it means did, not like here have you, right? Because here it was talking to you. Here it says, and did he. Now the ya is for he, referring to Allah. Jala is to make. So did he not make kaydahum? Kayd is a meticulous plan, and hum means them, so their plan. Fi tadlil, in or to go astray. Now we heard this word dalla in Surah Al-Fatiha. The last verse said, "Ghayril maghdubi alayhim walad dallin." Now the dallin, dalla is that root to go astray. So did we not make their meticulous plan just go haywire, go astray, not result in anything? In other words, not be successful in any way whatsoever. This is like a rhetorical question. Now there's 2 questions being asked here. Alam tara, you, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the companions of the elephants? Now, although it's addressed to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam in singular, but here it's a question of, you see, he was only born 50 days after this event, so he wasn't present when this event happened. So what happens here is, while it's addressing him personally in the verse 1, but verse 2 talks about, that if you ask the Quraysh around you, in other words, your family members, the other tribes around you, can they not verify that Allah actually did something to these companions of the elephant? Also, did he not make their plan go astray, their very meticulous logistical plan? And how did he do it? He said, wa arsala, and he sent, rasala, rasul, messengers that have been sent, arsala, the verb, and he sent on them or against them, tayran, but tayran is the plural for birds, ababil, in flocks or waves or squadrons or, huge, like, groups, group upon group upon group. So he sent upon them birds in their multitudes, in their hundreds, right? tarmihim, throwing them with. Rama is to throw. Rama, we also do Rama of the shaitan. We felt, it's called Rami as well. Tarmihim. So these birds pelted them, bihijaratin, with ordinary, simple, small stones baked in clay, means sijil. Faja'alahum, and he made them into what? Ka is like, or asfin is straw, and ma'kul from akala. Akala is to eat something. Ma'kul is something that has been eaten up. So basically, after the spelting of the stones that came in the hundreds, when you look down on this valley, Wadi Muhassar, all you could see is like almost a whole army, on its little, not even on its knees, like floored to the level of the ground. And you can't even make out the bodies. Their bodies were so charred by all this relentless raining of stones on them that they look like straw from a mountaintop just nearby or a hilltop nearby, where people were witnessing this with their eyes and saying, "Wow, what a thing that just happened in front of us!" And within minutes, the entire army was, brought to nothing and zero. There was nothing left of them. So this is the amazing thing about how Allah, when He wants to punish a people, He can do it. He'll give you rope to kind of carry on for yourself and do evil for what you think is an eternity. But one day is one day. When He decides to send down an azab on you, there will be no holding back. You'll never be able to protect yourself, whether it's from the top, whether it's from the ground level, where you can have a flood coming up and swallowing you up in terms of water, or it can be a sandstorm or an asifa, like a storm that comes like with the winds and just wipes you out, making you look like palm trees that have been, broken and fallen down. So Allah's azab is something we need to be careful of, and this is the surah that warns us of this, that, if you try and do something against a good cause, in this case, somebody trying to damage the Kaaba, such a big, a sin that you can just contemplate what the magnitude of a sin this is. Allah just made this whole plan of His just go haywire and didn't materialize whatsoever. So if you look at specific words in this particular surah, I've talked about tara, which means you see. Now, important here is also it says alam tara kayfa fa'ala, not what Allah did to the Ashabul Feel. He says, did you not see how He dealt with them? Now, the question how is different to a question what. It's not saying, like if you just say what was done, you can just say the army was defeated. That's the answer to a what question. But Kaifa has got like reason and logic and rationale and a strategy behind it. In other words, you had a strategy by you coming with your armies and your elephants and catering for their food and using horses and whatever else to bring your armies that far away, all the way here to Muzdalifah, only to get a hiding of your lives. So this is the Kaifa, explaining that your meticulous plan came all this way, and at the last minute, I showed you who was really in power. Right, so this is the Kaifa part. It's a lesson for all tyrant dictators over time, not only for the time when the birth of the Prophet happened, but for all centuries going forward. That any tyrant, when his time is up, and if Allah wants to, diminish his status or to bring him down or cut him down to size, He can do it overnight. He just has to say kun fayakun. It just be, and it will be, and it is. Right. So here also, what it's also telling the Quraysh that you had no power to prevent this onslaught. You in fact left it up to me as Allah, right? And I did it in my amazing way. Now this shows the absolute power that Allah has. Now the other thing about fa'ala and ja'ala, if you look at these are two verbs which means to do. Now here the first verb says fa'ala rabbuka bi ashabil fil, how Allah dealt with what He did. And fa'ala is normally reserved for Allah, using when He plans or when He wants to do something, like the word fa'ala is used. And then ja'ala is when man makes a plan. Also, he made or to do something, right? So there's a difference between fa'ala and ja'ala. Also, the word Kaid. Now, Kaid is a meticulous plan, something very, very thorough, strategic, down to the last letter of the T. You kind of planned it absolutely thoroughly. You took all your food, your water, your tents, your whatever you needed for this long 2-month journey going forward. So fine, you've got a Kaid in place. And then the other word sometimes used in other parts of the Quran is makar. And I'm sure you've heard the verse, وَمَكَرُوا وَمَكَرَ اللَّهُ وَاللَّهُ خَيْرُ الْمَاكِرِينَ. In other words, where somebody purposely wants to mislead for a reason. Now, Kaid is more sort of suitable for this particular one because there's a whole strategy behind it. Now, if you look at ancient times, religion was used to galvanize people for a cause. And today, they don't talk of religion so much. So, I mean, religion was used even in the Crusader period, right? Where in the name of the cross and the name of Jesus, people undertook these, massive crusading journeys from Europe coming into Jerusalem and overpowering the Muslims of the day. And it was only Salahuddin al-Ayyubi some 150 years later that was able to get these crusaders out of Jerusalem and Sham, with the help of Allah. Now, today, what people use is actually patriotism and secularism. They talk of, we got, they even call the missiles sometimes patriot missiles, so they play on people's, like, the fact that you belong to America or you belong to this great nation. And because we are, we want to maintain our greatness all over the world and our supremacy, because you either with us or you're against us. They play on that patriotism to say, come and enter the war with us against Iraq or against Kuwait or against whatever. And they use patriotism, and sometimes even in the name of secularism, where they join up to say, we are going to all go against the hijab, and from Switzerland to France, they'll all unitedly say that we are making this law against wearing of hijab in the name of secularism because we appreciate or we value secularism, and we don't want to be under the threat of religious dogmatism, etc. So today they use patriotism and secularism very much in the same way as people used in ancient days the religious reason. Now, we also know that Abraha's motive was not religious. It was political and economic power and trade relations. And Quraysh also had the same problem with Makkah. They also had idols that showed their sort of religious superiority, and they controlled the tribes through the idols that were there. So the tribes couldn't make a move, and they were almost threatened to say, if you oppose us in anything, all we'll do is we'll simply chop down your idol and you'll have nobody to worship. So they kind of controlled not only the purse strings of the economy, but they controlled even the idol worship that was going on. And idols were also used as a means of superiority. Then the other word fee. Fee is normally in, but in this context, it means did you not make their meticulous plan go into utter waste, like real serious destruction, right? And Allah we've covered before. We talked of, Abdool, so that right? So he sent birds alayhim, not on them, but against them, right? So it was like an army that was sent. They were like a dark cloud, many types of species, and Allah's glory and power was very, very evident on this particular occasion. The word arsala is used here, and he sent on them, a past tense verb, not you are sending him or sending them, but he sent against them these flocks of birds. But when you look at the next verse, talking of like the present tense, tarmihim, pelting them continuously, incessantly, all the time, right now. And it was like stone upon stone upon stone. So it was pelting them continuously and very rigorously, almost like pounding them to smithereens. Right now, the fact that Allah stopped this punishment from, or rather the punishment was only reserved for Abraham and his army, and the Quraysh were saved. The Quraysh were told, think about this event, that what would have stopped Allah from sending the birds maybe 200 or 300 meters further away from Abraha's army, and where you were camped on the mountains overlooking this whole battlefield? What stopped Allah from actually destroying even you in one go? But Allah said, I'm leaving you, I'm showing you this in the hope that you will change your ways, you'll stop your idol worship, and you'll go back to the worship of one true Allah, which we'll see is the message in Sura Quraish. Now, Sijin is like Sijil. Sijil is pebbles made of sand and water, and there was all these rotten carcasses after days that just made the place smell. And Asaf is Asfin. Asfin means straw, or straw that or grass that is eaten up by camels or horses. And whatever spills out of their mouth is cut pieces that they don't swallow. You look like blades of grass on the rocks and sand. So you look like chunks of cut grass, chewed, that no one want to even look at you again. You were eaten and discarded. So this really belittled Abraha and the army, and it was also a gift to the Prophet ﷺ, heralding a new chapter in the birth of monotheism with the birth of Muhammad ﷺ. Right, so Allah made Abraha a timeless example, like Pharaoh, the Firaun or Ramesses II in Egypt in Musa's time, where if you look at both these tyrants, Abraha on this side and the Pharaoh in Egypt, both of them thought they had hyper egos. They thought very highly of their prowess and their ability to conquer peoples and run over people and do things the way they wanted to. If you look at both of them, had similar fates. Where Abraha, although he was hurt to such an extent that they say 75% of his body weight was lost in this particular pounding of the stones on him. And he went back such a frail and haggard-looking person, like a skeleton, literally, to Yemen, where he died in the presence of other Yemenis, of other people there. And this body was not fit to even lay anywhere near Mina and Muzdalifah. So look at Allah's plan, that he took back the leader of this army, sent him back to where he came from, which is Yemen, and made him die there. And when he died in the presence of others, obviously the rest of the people in Yemen were shocked that, such a huge army were beaten not by people, but by birds and with stones. And you came back to tell us the story. And obviously, normally when an army loses, they take it as a sense of pride, that, now we're going to send a bigger army and we're going to go back and ensure that we win this time. But when they saw Abraha in the condition he was, no one actually bothered to even suggest that idea that let's go and seek revenge or we'll do a better job. They just thought, this is divine, and in a way that we don't want this fate to even befall us. So no one dared to go back to ever make this kind of an onslaught again in history. And this remains as a miracle from Allah. So this is the beauty of this particular surah. Very short, but very, very profound. And like I said in my last lesson, now that you know this particular surah as well, I would suggest that you try and read it as often as possible with Surah Al-Fatiha, and try and practice what I showed you last time as well in terms of how to improve your concentration. So when you do stand on a musalla, make a sincere intention that you're performing these 2 rakats just for the sole pleasure of Allah, and you make Allahu Akbar, leave the world behind, take a deep breath in, lower your shoulders, find relaxation. Literally do that. Your shoulders must feel loose. And then you say the Thana and A'udhu Billah and Bismillah. And after each line that you read, whether it's Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen or even this Alam Tara Kayfa Fa'ala Rabbuka bi Ashabil Feel, just pause there. Think of what the meaning of the words are. Ponder what's the significance of it. And take a deep breath with each verse so that you make your salah elongated. You don't rush through it, and you enjoy your salah, and hopefully you concentrate in it. So if you've got a photographic memory, it's nice to memorize this, take a mental picture of this particular English and Arabic side by side so you know what it is. And then the next thing I told you, you must take a page. If you're working on a computer screen, take a page of cardboard and block off the half. So in other words, show the Arabic side, and try now when you read this on your own, try and give the English equivalent of what you're reading on this first verse, the second verse, the fourth verse, what's it. And then once you get that right, if you don't come right, you go back and you look at it again. Then you go back forward and you say, right, now I know it. I can translate this myself, because if you can do it before you even stand on a musalla, the chances of you thinking about it on that musalla will be greater if this can ring a bell and come back to you. And then you do it the other way as well, which is look at the English version and try and say, what is the Arabic equivalent of all these things? And then to check your understanding of the words, this verb seen, what is it in Arabic? Is it tara or ja'ala or kaid or what? If you can say tara, then seen, that word. This dealt with, is it ja'ala or fa'ala? Which one of the two? This word, ashab or sahaba or sahib, or which word is it? And it's ashabul feel here, right? So, and this word, this meticulous plane, is kaid. Here it's tayran. Here, it's ababil, tarmihim, bijaratim in sijil, and then kasfin, ma'akul is chewed up. So if you can get that on your own, you'll be making progress in terms of getting your concentration right in your salah. Okay, we then move on to Quraish, which is the second of the series of 2 surahs, which is actually a link in terms of the meaning as well. 4 verses revealed in Makkah. This word Quraish is the name of the Meccan tribe, was the predominant tribe at the time. It's mentioned in the first verse here. And they were the custodians of the Kaaba, the people that looked after the Kaaba. They used to give people that came there the water and sometimes food to eat and water to drink. I mean, the well of Zamzam was there. So in any case, this is the surah, Li, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Li ila fi Quraish. Li means for, this first lam. And then the word ilaf, as you can see there, means trade agreements or covenants or trade pacts of the Quraysh or among the Quraysh. Ilafihim, their trade or their agreements during the Rihla is a trip, Shita is winter, and Saif is summer. So their trips or their covenants or their agreements during all these trips of the winter and the summer months. فَلْيَعْبُدُوا. Now, having described the Quraysh, now it's actually addressing the Quraysh. It's saying, oh, you Quraysh, you that have been looked after so well, Abra's army couldn't or didn't defeat you, nor did Allah's azab come on you when Abra's army was defeated. Think that how is it possible that you are able to form these trade agreements and pacts amongst your tribes? That's something to think about. Also, that we are able to make you travel from north to south in your caravans. You've got your literally truckloads of goods coming from Sham to Makkah to Yemen, going up and down all the time, right? If you got all this as like almost guarantees to you, what should you be doing in response to all this? Here's a command. It's saying, then let them worship. Talking to the Quraysh in the third person, not you, Quraysh, not you as a second person, telling them in the third person, that let them, right, worship. Abada, is ibadah. Ya'bud, the verb abada. Ya'budu is they worship. Rabba hadal bayt. Who must you worship? Not these silly idols that you've put inside and outside the Kaaba. You must worship the Rabb, the sustainer, the master of this particular house. The special house in the whole history of mankind, one of its kind, and you blessed with it, you have it on your soil. Don't denigrate it and humiliate it by polluting it with all these idols. You must actually worship the one true Allah, who is the Lord of this particular house. And why should you worship? He gives 2 reasons. Alladhi at'amahum. Ta'am, is food. Matam is a restaurant. So alladhi at'amahum, who has fed them, right? Against Jo'an means to be hungry. So who has fed them against hunger, in other words, kept them safe from always giving them food. You always had food to eat, even though you're living in the heart of a desert, which is a miracle of its own. And also on top of it, you had another miracle, which is amanahum. You gave them amana or security, right? Amanahum min khawf. Khawf, is fear, right? So he gave them both food and security. These are the 2 ni'mats that the Quraysh were blessed with. And also all these ilaf, these trade agreements that were in place, and no one attacked these caravans of camels loaded with goods. no one hijacked them along the route. There was guaranteed peace and security for you as Quraysh, as looking after the Kaaba. Why don't you just do what is in this middle verse? فَلْيَعْبُدُوا رَبَّ هَذَا الْبَيْتِ. Right, so this is in a very short 20-word surah. It's telling you about what the Quraysh should do, what they have been doing, how they polluted the message, and how they sort of almost monetized their religion by having these idols located there and charging literally like a tax to people as well for coming there and hosting their idols. So you really controlled the trade. We gave you all this, but you didn't appreciate it because you didn't actually want to worship the Lord of this house. You didn't want to declare your Tawheed for Allah. Now, this is, again, if you look at these two, the Jew and Amana, is the hunger and the security that I talked of in the Dua of Ibrahim 2,500 years before. Well, now, Tabari, Umar radiallahu anhu used to always read these two surahs, Alam Tara and Ila fi Quraish, as one, without even saying Bismillah between the two surahs. And because basically the message is a continuous message from Abraha to the Quraysh to what should be done in and around the Kaaba. And Tabari talks of two gifts that the Arab tribes of Makkah had. One is you were saved from the annihilation of Abraha in the previous surah. So I destroyed your enemy so your trade agreements can remain. Shouldn't you make shukr for that? Shouldn't you show gratitude to me for that? And second, in this one, reminding you of your economic strength, giving you ample food and security, even though you lived in the harshest of deserts. Isn't that some miracle that you should actually be grateful for? Right, so what must you do? At least acknowledge who is your Lord and become his abd or slave, and and play out the fact that you are doing what Ibrahim alayhi salam also wanted out of the Kaaba to be used for. Li, we said, for the convenience of Ilaf is because of all the blessings or gratitude should soften immediately. So, the fact that you should become softened by the fact that Allah has blessed you in such a big way. This is just the origins of what the word Quraysh come from. It's like the diminutive of the smaller form of, from Abd you get Ubaid, so from Quraysh you get Quraysh. But this is just by the way, but Quraysh is just the proper noun for this particular tribe. Right, and then we have the word Rihla, which is different from Safar or Saha or Ta'an, three different types of travel. But Rihla is used because this is a trip where you take lots and lots of baggage when you travel. And a camel is a ship of the desert. You can put cargo, like you wouldn't believe, on the backs of a camel, load it on both sides and even on its back, and you can then move to the desert with ease. And the amazing thing is you moved with all this baggage, with all these goods and trade, and despite you moving in a desert, there were no robbers or bandits along the way that would steal from you or loot your baggage or your goods in trade. So this is also an amazing miracle that Allah blessed you with, and you must be grateful for. Right. So this is the long distances they traveled, up and down all the time, winter and summer. It was too hot here, they went to the winter on the other side, and we allowed and facilitated this travel with ease as a form of blessing to you. Right, so because we allowed his house to be saved and you are protected, what you must do is simply worship or focus on the worship of the Rabb of this house. And if you look at this, it's talking to the Quraysh, not in a direct form, oh, you Quraysh do this. It's talking of them in the third person, So it's like creating distance between Allah and the Quraysh, where he's saying that we don't really need you. Talking about you as if you are them, like somebody outside. If you really worship us, then you are like dignified to be addressed personally, like as a you. Like Alam Tara, like dignified as a prophet was addressed directly in the first verse in Sura Al Feel. So all in all, your heart should be softened for very many reasons. We annihilated your enemy. We ensured that the house of Allah is not for idols and shirk. And obviously it didn't happen overnight. I mean, it took a period of almost 40 years when the Prophet ﷺ was, the revelation had come to him, and then 13 years in Makkah after the revelation came to him. So it took a long time before the Quraysh were like given this message over and over and over to say, what, cleanse this filth out of the Kaaba, do it, otherwise it will get done for you, as we'll see in Iraja Nasrullah al-Fat. If you don't do it, we'll get an army, or we'll get the Sahabas and the Prophet to do it later, just 10 years later, in one of the greatest victories ever on Meccan soil. So here it's a time for the Quraysh to reflect and say, you're given all these bounties, make something out of it. Right? I think we talked of all that, and amazing about in the Battle of Badr, when the Quran talks of Battle of Badr, in other verses they talk of security first, because that was the biggest thing in a battle, and food came later because it was a matter of life and death. So when you're fighting an army that wants to destroy you completely, obviously your topmost thing in your mind is not what food you're going to eat, but security. You mustn't be killed. So there, security was talked of first and food later. But here they're talking of food first in this surah, and then security later, because in a desert, this is the more important thing, that you need to be, have enough food to sustain you and make you survive. So all in all, these are the two surahs that come side by side. And once more, I'm saying what you need to do is look at this verse, the surah in its totality, and study it carefully, read it a few times yourself, use YouTube and even other resources to find good qaris that recite these surahs with tajweed, so you can improve even on your tajweed reading of this particular surahs. And once you got a reading, then you can look at, if you can remember these ilaf, these trade agreements or covenants and the rest. So if you can fit those pieces together, you can then block out the English and see if you can now say the whole English story yourself. And you must try this. And then after you've said the English story completely, you know it well, then you're ready for salah. If you're not, you go a step back, go over this once more, 2 times more, 3 times more, take your time, get all these words firmly embedded in your mind, so that when you stand on that musalla, your salah is absolutely meaningful. In other words, you know exactly each word, what you're saying, what it means, what it denotes, what its connotation is, where it was revealed to who, and what is the message. And in all this, I think the message from these two surahs is that tyrant dictators will never ever succeed. Allah's got a day, one day is one day, they will be dealt with. Our role in life is to look at this particular verse, that we should do ibadah, whether we near that house or even far away, like we are in South Africa, but facing the direction of the Kaaba. In your Qibla alone, you must stand firmly with your mind focused on what the Kaaba is in front of you, and worship Allah sincerely, saying, I worship the Rabb of this particular house, and I put away all this, trade and agreements and pacts and all the machinations we involved with, and sometimes the evil that plots and plans that we make against each other. We need to be a united ummah, have one sort of worship of one Allah in mind, and this must actually be a source of unity to create love and unity in the ummah. Also, if you look at this ilaf, it's also, if you look at today, we have the World Trade Organization and World Bank, and this is exactly what ilaf is about. They make trade agreements for all the countries in the world. They make covenants, right? And then if every country has to sign on that dotted line to agree with these trade agreements that America or the European Union or the UK or sometimes even China now is the way it's colonizing Africa. They make these trade agreements amongst themselves, and then we are told to toe the line, right? And this trade agreements allows for free trade, whether it's in the winter or the summer months, in other words, the whole year, 24/7, 365, and also between North and South or East and West. It's like trade agreements are working the whole globe. The whole international community is bound one way or the other to these trade agreements, and you can't import or export unless you pay the different tariffs that people agree on. And this is the way the North sort of colonizes or takes over, the rest of the third world and the developing world through all these trade pacts and agreements. And what we need to be aware of is that these trade pacts, while they are in place, we need to form our own trade pacts amongst ourselves. I mean, what's stopping us as an African Union or the African Continent Free Trade Agreement coming into place, where we amongst African countries, we open our borders to trade so that we allow, the cross flow of goods and services easily amongst people at a much easier, rate, and we don't get committed into long-term, interest-bearing debts and loans that we have to take from the World Bank and all these other organizations just to be able to survive as countries in this developing world. So there's a profound message for all of us to say, you know what, there are leaders, there are people or superpowers of the day today in Europe and in the West that control all these movement of goods and services. And we need to unite as an ummah and ensure that we don't fall prey to what their machinations and dealings are, and that we can form our own trade agreements and pacts to allow the continent to prosper the way it should, and keeping us away from all these, plans and cades that these people put in our way. All right, so that covers the two surahs of today. I'll look at Surah Al next week. So I think let's leave it at that. I think the time is up as well. Let's end off with Surah Al-Asr. A'udhu billahi minash shaitani rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Wal asr innal insana lafi khusr illa alladhina amanu wa amilus salihati wa tawasaw bil haqqi wa tawasaw bis sabr.